All right, hello everyone. My name is Dan Allen. I'm a business owner, lead of several open source projects you might recognize, and a published author. And my focus right now is on documentation tooling. I'm actually working on an open source platform named Antora that's based on AsciiDoc, and the goal of Antora is to make writing documentation easy, collaborative, and scalable. So I'm here today. I'm going to share with you brain hacks that I use to write fluently every day. And to practice what I preach, I'll get the ball rolling by starting with a hack by that very name. So if you want to write fluently, the thing I definitely recommend not doing is to say, I'll start tomorrow. Here's how much you'll write today, the day after today, and the day after that. Now, you and I know that tomorrow never actually comes. So you want to seize the moment and start today. But I know the next excuse that's coming. Yeah, but I don't have time today. I mean, I'm at Devoxx, right? So, but let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that you finish today. No, no, no. What I'm talking about here is I'm talking about starting. Focus on getting the ball rolling. Take comfort, actually, in the fact that what you're writing isn't going to be done today, tomorrow, in a week, a month, maybe even longer. And it doesn't matter whether you write a whole outline or you write a couple of paragraphs or just a couple of sentences. That little bit, no matter how minute it is actually a lot more than you realize. That's because you've given your brain permission to start. And what's going to happen when you do that is that even though you might stop, your brain's not going to. It'll keep working because you've effectively kicked off a thread that's going on in the back of your brain, and it's going to start chipping away at the problem, maybe even when you sleep. I know it certainly does for me. That background thread is there feeding off of your life's experiences. It's now just collecting and collecting, pulling in ideas, making connections, all stuff that it's going to incorporate into your writing later. So it's kind of like that bowl rolling down the lane. No matter how slow it got started, it's eventually going to make its way down to those pins. So don't be afraid just to give it a little push. Give your mind permission to get into the writing process. It's the easiest part, and it's the best thing you can do to get started. So worry about the finishing part later. And when I first wrote this, I wrote finishing party later, which, okay, maybe we need that too. I cover this hack first because it paves the way for all the hacks that are to come, especially the next one, pre-writing, that ties closely into this. So when we think of writing, we make the mistake of thinking of it the physical act of writing. But that's an extremely narrow way to look at it. And it's precisely why we get stuck looking at that, the blank page. Writing really begins a lot longer before this, and it will, but you have to let it, and that's the key. So I refer to this as pre-writing. And it's really where, for me, the inspiration for writing comes from. So when I'm pre-writing, I'm bouncing around ideas and phrases and witty lines in my head. But how do I do it? Well, the way I do it is I intentionally pull myself away from my desk. If I try to chain myself to my desk to write, my brain, it senses this restriction, and that's immediately when the writer's block starts to set in. So what I do is I step away from the headlights of the blank screen or the expectations of the keyboard, and I get away from it. And it's that inability to write that actually works in my favor because it allows my brain the freedom to roam. So needing something to do, of course, my brain immediately gets to work chewing on problems. And when that happens, what I do is I stand back and I just start to listen to the dialogue that's sort of going on in my head. And sentences do arrive, and they just sort of formulate there. And if I listen, I can pick them up. Now, you could say that I'm brainstorming, but for me, it goes a lot deeper than that. What I'm really doing is I'm rehearsing the lines that I'm going to eventually write. So by the time I do them, it's like I've already been through them a couple of times. So as I get into this process, I sense that my motivation to write is starting to build, still away from my screen at the moment. So my hands will start, rushing through a task that I'm on, or my feet will start to move a little bit more swiftly, or I get a little heavier on the gas pedal. It's time to hightail it back to my desk because now my brain needs to seek out that blank page. Now I want it because I need to get I download all those thoughts and put them onto the screen and hammer out those sentences. Try to take that stuff that's in my brain before I lose it. I want to get it down. There's that urgency. And to be honest, I never remember the page ever being blank, or driving home for that matter. But that's a separate problem. So, but I can feel the words just, and I focus on them coming right out of my brain and onto the page. And that's really the moment that I want to capture here. And if you'll notice, pre-writing morphed into actual writing. And now that I know that this is true, I no longer feel that obligation to put my butt in the seat, to keep myself at the keyboard, thinking that's what's going to lead to writing. Instead, what I do is I roam. I get away, and in a lot of ways, the world becomes my writing theater. Everything that's around me is actually the source of inspiration for my writing. And it's all one big rehearsal for what I'm going to do later. Now, for me, my brain literally writes for me. And I often say that the act of physical writing is me just transcribing the thoughts that are in my head, as crazy as that may seem. But hopefully this works for you. So one of the challenges with writing is knowing what to write about. Or if I had an idea, then do I remember it when I'm actually going to start writing or pre-writing? So what you need is a well to draw from. Some sort of a writing backlog, if you will. So the brain hack that I use for this is I maintain this file called a WORKLOG in every project that I work on. So the file contains notes about what I want to write. It may have notes about what I want to improve. I kind of think of it as a combination of a task list and a journal, an ideas board. It doesn't contain a lot of information about any one thing. It's not my issue tracker or whatever. It's just notes to myself. For me, it's like this little garden that I keep of ideas. Now, the two most important things about a WORKLOG file is, one, that it's in each project that you work on. So it's contextual. And then it's also easy to edit. So let's touch on those. So the fact that it lives inside the project allows it to serve as a compass for me. So when I am switching from one project to another, the first thing I do is I want to figure out, okay, where did I leave off and what am I doing next? So I immediately open my WORKLOG file, scan through it, get my bearings straight, and I figure out what I'm going to work on. So it's giving me ideas about where to start, but it also helps me know what to tackle if I get stuck or I get lost or get confused, or if I finish something and I want to move to the next thing, so I go back. And so these starting points are those are the starting points for hacks 1 and 2. Now the WORKLOG also comes into play when I'm actually writing. So once the synapses start to fire and I'm really going with my writing, I often get ideas, too many ideas, right? They're coming faster than I can deal with them. And this can get in the way of writing fluently because your brain wants to go off on all these tangents. So the WORKLOG to the rescue. So what I do here is when an idea pops into my head, but I keep thinking about it, I can't let it go because I'm afraid I'm going to lose it, I just open up the WORKLOG, jot it down, and back to what I was working on. And I know that as soon as I finish what I'm writing, I'm going to go back to the WORKLOG, and that's when I'll find it again. And think about this. Since those ideas came basically effortlessly, then it actually makes writing the next thing all that easier. The WORKLOG also gives you a sense of progress. Each time you finish a task, you nuke it from the list. We love doing this because it gives us a chance to reflect on what we've accomplished so far, kind of like a little reward. So knock off the completed items, replace them with some new ones, and just keep on moving. Now, the last thing I'll mention about this is that before I leave a project, I always kind of add something enticing to the top of the WORKLOG file to get into next time, or I'll move it up in the list. So what do I want to do when I sit back down again? And this really helps me link my writing sessions together so I can just write fluently from one to the next. So the WORKLOG's really helping us transition into writing and also helping us stay in the flow when we are writing. So another way to write fluently is to think of it as simple communication. So we've made ourselves convince ourselves, if you will, that writing is so difficult, but there's actually something that we do every day that debunks that. Think about email. a message comes in your inbox, you press reply, you write something, and you don't even really think of this as writing, and you're doing it all day long. How about social media? It poses the question, what's happening? And you burn through those 140 characters. Oh, no, that wasn't enough. 280 characters in no time. How about an interview? An interviewer doesn't just look at you and say, speak. You know, they're asking you questions and you're replying, and you don't even have time to really think. You just, it just streams out. So as a human, you're a communication machine, and so that's not the problem. But why is it only that we're only a communication machine all the times when we're not writing? So the answer is simple. You're answering questions. So when you do formal writing, you're thinking about things like structure. You're thinking about the beginning, the middle, and the end, the arc, the headings. And when you're answering questions, all those things go out the window and you're just speaking your mind. So how do we use this for hack for writing? Well, it's pretty simple. You formulate a question, then you write your response. So when you're having difficulty getting started, write a question to yourself and then answer it. Use that as an opportunity to tease out all that information that's in your brain. I kind of think of these questions as like little writing katas. With each burst of information, one, you've got the ball rolling. You're doing something, you're writing. But you're also unloading all of those ideas and thoughts from your brain that it keeps hoarding. And that frees up space in your brain to think about new things. Now, speaking of this, let's actually circle back to the beginning of this hack about that email again. We think writing comes so easy with email. Maybe there's something there we can do to help with our writing. So a very clever brain hack that I discovered comes from a former colleague of mine who's a system administrator. So I introduced him to wikis. It was a very novel concept for him at the time. And he then came back to me and said, oh, I've got this technique that I use now. Whenever someone asks him a question, and being a system administrator, that's frequently, so he does not reply directly. What he does is he writes the answer on a wiki page and then sends them a link to that page. So if someone comes asking him the same question again, he just points them to that page. So instead of letting email ruin his day, he takes that time, reinvests it into writing documentation, and then just sends out the links. So it's so brilliant. So let's say that we're doing this. We're writing an email, and mid-reply, you realize that this could be documentation. So keep writing. Stay in that mode, because for you, we've gotten so used to that screen being something that doesn't scare us. Write the whole documentation out there, but before you send it, cut it, put it into a page, give it a little bit of a beginning and an end, post it, and then reply to it with a link. Never allow yourself to press send when you have this huge piece of content you've written in an email that can be reused. I think that this hack is fantastic for documentation writers, but where I think it also applies really well is support personnel. And being a lead of several open source projects, I understand support is a full-time job. So what I tend to do is when someone asks me a question, I know the answer. It's enticing to answer it. But I think about this. It must be one of two things is true. Either there's documentation missing, that's why this question is being asked, or it means that documentation already exists and I just need to help the person find it. But what I don't need to be doing is writing a custom email again. So the outcome of this scenario is the same either way. The documentation is going to cover that question. And writing that documentation just didn't feel so hard. So other times you've got all these thoughts in your head, but it's like a traffic jam trying to get them out of your brain. And you just can't seem to pull them together into something that flows. So what you need is some structure. So when I take a break from writing, I tend to read the news. And during one of those breaks, I had this idea about how I could find that structure that I was lacking. So have you ever skimmed the headlines and concluded, all right, I know everything that's going on in the world now. Now, admittedly, I do this. I know you probably have done this before. It's easy to just skip the articles and stick with the headlines. But that's not the best way to stay informed about what's really going on in the world. But it does help us realize that perhaps there's something to this that we can use for writing. So instead of starting by writing full sentences, what I encourage you to do is just write your document like they're just headlines. You know, just the stuff that, you know, gets people looking at the news. You know, eye-catching headlines, for instance. Something that you want them to know, but you don't want to share with the details now. Or you're trying to work out the progression, so you need to know this before you know this. So write down those headlines and skip over the details. So what you've done is you've hacked your brain into figuring out what your major talking points are. And that's an outline. So now all you have to do is you have to fill in the space between them. So how do I do that? Well, let's go back for a second and think, let's say I wrote all my headlines, and then I gave that to someone. And them, like in our story earlier, they think, oh, I know everything about this technology now because I read the headlines. So here's the question. If they only knew that, what are they missing? Where's the nuance? What is it that they need to know to get their facts straight? Write those things down and answer them. And just like it's sort of a reverse it, you're trying to inform that person. Or they're interviewing you and you're giving back these responses in an interview. So when you're done, you simply go back and you just post that as a document. Now the other way to do this is instead of writing headlines, write questions and then fill in the details. And when you're done filling in the details, go back and change the headings, just change those to statements. And that's, you know, now you've got your full manuscript. So the secret here is to do a lightweight writing, basically. Just write all the headlines, write all the topics. If you have to, write questions, and then go back and just look at like an interview. So hacking your brain into extracting the details. Now, as writers, we know there's nothing more dreadful than a blank page. Yet the solution, it's so simple. You just make the page not blank. Okay, well, so what do we put there? Well, just put something. It doesn't matter. Even if you hate it or you love it, it doesn't matter. Just put something on the page. One idea is to take the WORKLOG and just take some items from the WORKLOG and stick them onto the page, just to get something on the screen. Now you have something you can build on. You're not staring at a blank screen. And I call this hack the content flytrap. So it works because content is sticky. So what do I mean by that? It's sticky for readers? No, it's sticky for other content. Content that can latch onto the ideas that are in your brain and pull them down onto the page. So what you do is you put that out there, you start writing, and then you iterate and rearrange until you have something that's actually worth editing. Now, if you're having difficulty setting up this hack, it could be that you don't really know what your subject is. So take a moment to think why you're writing. You know, what's the purpose of it? Now, here's the trick. Write that down. Content will then start sticking to it. Another technique is to add a visual onto the page and then start writing about that. So for instance, you could put an image or a code block onto the page and then start explaining to someone what that code block is. But here you've moved the subject from something abstract, like I want to write an introduction to Kubernetes, to an actual code sample, and then here I'm telling them what they have to type or what they have to, what actions they have to take. Now, if that doesn't work, you can use a technique I picked up from Damian Conway's Instantly Better Presentations talk. Definitely a talk I recommend checking out if you're a presenter. So open up your editor, your notebook, and write down everything you can think about the topic that you're about to write about. You know, just could be facts that you know or points. Then when you're done writing, you can't think of anything else. You've written everything down, just things that you know. Circle the big points. Cross out the meaningless lesser points. Now you've got your content flytrap. Now all you have to do is sort those points and morph them into paragraphs and sentences. So to write fluently, the key here is just you hang content out there, and then you let other content come along and start to stick to it. Don't let the blank page get you sort of deer in headlights. Now, a lot of the reason we have trouble getting into the flow is because we choke over the opening. You know, how do I start this? What's the first sentence? So just start somewhere else. So since we're at Devoxx, I know you all love 007, because you shouldn't, because Stefan would be upset with you if you didn't. Now, how does every James Bond film start? With action, of course. So before the title screen, boom, there's this action-filled opening scene. And we can do the same with writing. Open your writing session with the action. Don't start with the boring stuff. So what I like to do is I like to start with the main procedure. So if I'm writing a tutorial, what is it that the user has to do first, second, and third? First, you have to install this. Then you have to, add this configuration file. Just explain that part. That's it. Get that part, that part of it filled in, and that's the meat, right? So now we need some stuff that's going to go around it. So what we do is we think, okay, well, first of all, who's this for? So keep that audience in mind. And what are they going to accomplish or learn by going through this procedure? Okay, write that down. Why do they need to learn this? Okay, write that down. How is it going to benefit them? Do they really need this? Write that down. Okay, now sort of rearrange those things. Add a conclusion. Tell them what they learned. Now give it a title. Voila, you've got your document. And it all worked by starting from the inside out. Notice that this action is actually tying into the last tip. It's the content fly trap. So that procedure ends up being the thing that everything's going to stick to. And I really like this. Again, going back, it's something tangible. It's something tangible that you're going to write about. And if you get lost, you can always go back and look at that. And the other part of this is that you're warming yourself up by writing about procedure. And in the meantime, your brain, that background thread, is pre-writing. It's starting to think, oh yeah, there's this point I need to make to the reader. They need to know this. So that's happening while you're just doing the procedural stuff. And then when you go to write, you're ready and warmed up to write that. So the single biggest influence on my writing is this technique known as ventilated prose. This is actually a good old-fashioned brain hack that dates well before the time of computers. In the 1930s, Buckminster Fuller actually coined this term. And so it's since gone on to have other names like sentence per line or ventilated prose. And I've mentioned this before in talks at Devoxx. I talk about it on Twitter. I'm going to keep talking about it because for me, this is a major thing. So first, what is it? Well, instead of stringing together a whole paragraph in one line and letting it wrap, as you would in traditional writing, or you hard wrap at a fixed column, kind of like a programmer, instead you write prose like you're writing a list. Each sentence, phrase, or chunk gets its own line, and when you're ready to start a new one, you just hit return and keep typing. It's simple as that. Now, if you're a developer, you may recognize this as how you write statements in a programming language. And that's no mistake. So let's consider the benefits that it brings, because we'll actually be able to use some of our tooling from our IDE to take advantage of this. So first, you can easily move lines around. You could split paragraphs apart. You can put them back together, turn lines into bullets or vice versa. The whole document is just way more malleable. You can detect run-on sentences because you can see the length of the line very easily. Sentences can be worked on in isolation, so when you commit, the diff is very clear. It was just this line and this line that got affected, and all the lines around it didn't. Another thing you can do is you can comment out lines, or you can leave comments in between the lines, maybe notes or messages to the other authors. Each sentence also gets its own line number. We're going to see why this is important later. It's easier to detect problems with the flow, and it makes transitioning from your outline to regular writing very seamless because you actually just use bullet points when you write. You just don't have the bullets. So ventilated prose, it's so simple, yet it's fundamentally changed how I write. And that's because, for me, it's the way that my brain's working. It's kind of thinking at the sentence level. And the other thing that's important is that most of the energy in writing actually goes into editing. You spend a little bit of time at the beginning writing the original work, but then you spend tons of time editing it. So the fact that you can move lines around and shuffle things around is actually critical for being able to do editing well. So I use this exclusively now when I write, and I really couldn't imagine going back. So I hope that it works out for you. Now, another great hack for writing fluently is to pair write. This is very similar to pair programming. you're tapping into the brain of another, and two heads are, better than one, right? Especially when you're in the ideation phase, you're just trying to gather ideas. So humans are social by nature, but for some reason when we write, we like to be in solitude. And we learned from The Shining, this doesn't end well. So one way to pair write is to simply talk it out. Verbalizing for me really helps me think. It's a creative outlet and helps me think about what it is that I'm really trying to say. My victim is usually my partner, but fortunately she's supportive. So what I do is I go over with her what I plan to write, we discuss, I go back and write it down. Now, if you're looking for a more hands-on approach, something like a collaborative writing environment is really valuable. An amazing tool for this is Teletype for Atom. If you don't know about it, you really should. So Teletype allows you and a collaborator to sync your edits together from the comfort of your own IDE. So it's not like you don't have to go to Google Docs. You can just use your own IDE for this. And it fuses together your keystrokes. Now, what it doesn't solve for you, though, is how you stay in sync when you're writing so you don't step on each other's toes. And this goes back to ventilated prose. If you split up your document with each sentence being a line or each phrase being a line, then you turn on line numbers and you can say, oh, on line 6, let's work on that paragraph. Let's work on that sentence, rather. So this can really be the difference between having a very productive collaborative writing session and just constantly editing the same sentence and stepping on each other's toes. So remember earlier how I said that writing wasn't just limited to the part of the actual physical writing, but it was the stuff before? Well, it actually is after as well. So a technique that I use here is something I call a couch read. So a couch read is when I lay out on a couch, I pull up a pull up my document on a portable device like my phone, and I start reading it from top to bottom. And what's so amazing about this is that you really see stuff that you couldn't see when you were at the desktop. And the reason for this is that you only have one lotus of attention, and your desktop wants that lotus of attention. So your brain sort of knows that it's going to be distracted at any time, so you're not really truly focused on your doc. But when I'm laid out on the couch, I have a whole nother frame of mind, and now I'm the only thing I can see is the document, and my field of view is just the paragraph. And boy, do the errors jump out at me then. Or I see the problems with the flow, or I come up with a better way of saying it. Or I may realize that the whole document is just upside down. This isn't what I want. So I'll go back and I'll jump from the couch back to my desk, do some rewriting, and then go back to the couch again. Now, take it from a published author, you're never going to write like someone else. For years, I would read books and think, oh, one day I'm going to sound like that. Well, spoiler alert, I never did. I still sound like me. And that's actually a good thing. When I published my book, a lot of people came up to me and they said they really loved it. But what they would tell me, what they would cite, is that they loved the way that I wrote. That to them, it was like I was just speaking directly to them in a language they could actually understand. So what it is that they loved was, sure, the content, but they really loved my voice, my way of writing. And we all have that. It's our style. And it's our personality in writing. So to write fluently, discover yourself and be yourself. Accept that it's going to sound different than someone else, and don't let that get in the way of you writing. You can take ideas, from other people or a turn of phrase or a format or a structure, but in the end, make it your own. It could be that your reader was actually waiting for your voice to break up the doldrums of all the stuff they've been reading. So it might be that that's what they're really looking forward to. So your uniqueness sells. So I want to credit Denise Jacobs for the idea behind this hack, and I definitely recommend checking out this book, Banish Your Inner Critic. It's all about not stepping on your own toes when you're trying to write. So I have one final hack to share with you before I go. Call it a parting gift or a baker's dozen. Write in plain text, specifically AsciiDoc. A lot of the hacks that I shared with you today actually work because I write in plain text. The biggest interruption to us writing fluently is fighting with the tools, trying to change what it is that we're writing. So what we want is we want to be in control of our own writing. Since the bulk of what we read as words, you don't want anything to be between you and the words. So when you're writing in plain text, it's just characters, lines, and paragraphs. It's raw, it's unobtrusive. You could even say it's intimate. And it allows you to focus all of your attention just on what it is that you want to say. And when you do need to influence the formatting in some way, you have little shorthands like stars for bold and underscores for italics. Add those things in sparingly, but really don't let it get too much in your way. So here's the list of brain hacks we covered today that I use to write fluently. As it so happens, I happen to use almost all of these in writing this talk, so I know they work, eating my own dog food. Now, since you're programmers, I don't have to remind you that there's no silver bullet. No one of these hacks is going to make you write fluently. But if you blend them together, get some ideas that you picked up from someone else and throw in a couple of your own, you'll find a way to get the ball rolling. And in my mind, that's the secret to really getting all of this to happen. So I really want you to unlock your full potential, give these a try, and see what happens. Thank you, and best of luck with your writing.